to do this month or this quarter or next year. It's about a permanent benefit, which is cumulative over time as capital gets retained and reinvested in the United States. We've already mentioned immigration, trade, tax, regulation. Small business formation is lower than it's ever been in the United States in recovery. This recovery is 10 years long, a little over 20%. It's the most anemic recovery from a major recession we've ever had. It should have been 40%. Okay, we're graduating kids who, 70% of the kids between 17 and 24 are not eligible for military service because of obesity or they can't read or write. Okay, we're relegating generations of kids at inner city schools to poverty because we're not educating them properly and giving them training to get a job when they get out. And there are fixes. I don't know if any of you have been to aviation high school, in Long Island City, or Alfred E. Smith School. That's a high school. It teaches regular high school stuff. The Alfred E. Smith School teaches the kids how to maintain cars. They leave $45,000 a year jobs. And, if we don't do a better job, we're going to have ongoing political disputes, slower growth, more anemic. So we have to do all those things, and most of those things are our own policies. They're not the weather. It's not anything that we can't control. It's stuff that's in our control. Oh, I should mention infrastructure. Okay, we put a man on the moon in 8 years. It takes 12 years at Bayonne Bridge, 12 years to get the permits to rebuild a broken bridge that would have killed people if we didn't rebuild it. 12 years. And, you laugh. It's disgraceful. That's the country we all love. We just don't have this can-do attitude anymore.
But I want to get back to what you do and talk about small business lending and how you approach that, and why hasn't it grown more?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. So small business and kind of middle market lending has been less growth and recovery. I think part of the reason is the recovery's been anemic. So remember, some of that lending is for inventory, plant, equipment, and a 2% growth versus 3.5% growth. That's a big difference in how much they need to finance as opposed to how much they earn from their own cash flow. I think taxes probably helped a little bit because I got to retain a little bit more. But the health of the small businesses that are there are fine. The formation is less. And they would tell you it's regulation, litigation, not access to capital.
I know that you used to, I don't know if you still do that, you used to carry a list around.
Yeah.
And you used to do every weekend a list of the things, I guess the things you didn't want to do or the tough things to do. So what was on your list? What did you put on your list this weekend? Yeah,
so I carried, I don't have it with me, and every now and then I put it on my phone, but I have this list. It's called a follow-up list. It's not just one. That's the one I want to get done right away. Calls, you owe me something, I owe you, I got to get something done, a client issue, an ops issue. I just want a quick follow-up on something. But every business has a list. I expect people to have lists and follow-up, and they know we're going to follow up in January, February, March, April, with analytics and detail, and it's just a real discipline to get things done. But I learned a long time ago, when I used to ask people for something, 3 weeks later, I say, didn't I ask you for that before? Like, how's this branch doing, or this, that? They say, oh, yeah. So now they know. I write it down. I expect them to write it down, too, and I expect to follow up quickly. And I return every phone call and every email almost every single day. I expect my people to do the same. I know a lot of your clients, if you don't get your bankers to call you back right away, call me. I'll give them the call you right back.
But that's a follow-up list, but you also have another list.
And I do make this list, by the way.
Right.
On Sunday, I do a lot of reading. I like a lot of Friday reports. I kind of make the list, kind of the things that I have to take care of that maybe I've been avoiding.
So I wanted to know, what was on your list this Sunday?
Well, it was comp season and feedback season, so it was a lot of that. I had a board meeting yesterday, and so there's a bunch of things I had to do there. But I always want to make sure that I'm not avoiding. Like everybody else, there's certain things you just don't really want to do. And so very often I come in on Monday morning and I just do them. Just get them off my table so I can enjoy the rest of the week.
Get them off your list.
Get them off my list, yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting about JPMorgan Chase, and almost much more since you've been there, is the depth and the quality of your management. And you've had many people leave to become CEOs of other companies and so on. It's almost like, it's the draft season. But you keep on moving on without a beat. So how do you motivate, retain, recruit, and create that kind of depth and quality of management?
I think we have an unbelievable management team. And I think, to me, the most important thing, I think most people know this, you don't like working for people you don't trust and respect. And we've all seen that. And trust and respect means that door, you're to your office, that anyone can walk in is treated equally. It's not your goombas and your friends. It's not just one side. It's not male versus female. It's anyone. and that the answer to the question is what's the right thing to do for the company, the client, or your community. It's not about, competing with the people down the hallway. And then there are all these signs about that. When you have these, how many of you constantly, there's always like the meeting after the meeting. I have to see about this, and I didn't want to say it in front of everybody. That doesn't happen with me. I tell them, you're not going to come say it. Say it in front of your partners, or don't say it at all. And say it because you think it's the right thing to do and how we should go about doing it, so you have open conversations. So I think that treating people with trust and respect, it also means that, by the way, the boss doesn't know everything. So if the boss has to know everything and is like scared and everything's got to be presentations, and then you don't have a chance to thrive. So you saw good bosses, when something goes wrong, they say, it was my fault. They're not pointing fingers at people. They're not hanging out people have to dry. And they're sharing credit. So I'm going to call it humility, not humbleness, but humility to know you don't know everything. Humility to know that you can't predict the future. Humility to know that, the experts who know, when I need to know someone at JPMorgan, I have to call someone. I can't do it myself. And so, and I think people like working in an environment where they're treated that way.
So you can't predict everything, but I'm going to have you try to make some predictions or some outlook, some views on the economic outlook. And I want to get back to the shutdown, because it's not only the shutdown. Yeah. Even if we resolve the shutdown quickly, the next issue is the debt ceiling. I mean, there are a number of issues that pertain to our fiscal situation. And I'm wondering how you see that and how you managed to navigate through all of that.
So we have risk committees that meet every week. I go when I'm in town, which is only about half the time. And every one of these, you can imagine the diligence which we go through, the detail. The last time we had a government debt ceiling thing, we spent, I'm going to say, $50 to $75 million getting prepared for it. And it would be an unmitigated disaster. But we had to think through that if you're getting Social Security checks, depositing a thing, are we going to front that to you? That the money would stop circulating around the world, that you would have had default of certain government securities by law, U.S. government securities. Therefore, a lot of you would be forced to sell these securities. And I can go on, and the government didn't. I mean, here's a basic question. Does the government debt cross default? Now, even all the people up here are geniuses. Does government debt cross default? It does not. I didn't know that until we started asking this question. But will the Federal Reserve take defaulted government debt as collateral? I called them asking that question. They couldn't answer it. But it's important. If they can't, you're done. Yeah. And so the answer is they cannot take defaulted stuff as collateral other than U.S. government debt. But having to even go through this is a silly way to run your life.
China. We talk a lot about trade policy, but the relationship with China is a lot more complicated than trade policy. And, there have been advisories about executives not traveling to China and so on. What is your view of the China-U.S. relationship?
So this will be the most important relationship in the world for the next 100 years. I think it's incumbent upon both of us to try to do a good job with it. I think that the administration has laid out very important things about trade. And I think the business community is supportive. They were not totally before, and I think the business community can get very selfish sometimes when it comes to trade. Well, this is good for me, my company. But America, the stealing of IP, reciprocal investment rights, tariffs, non-tariff barriers, subsidies to state-owned enterprise, this has to be fixed. And I think China knows and is serious. So now you have serious people on both sides who are actually listening to each other and talking. And you read what's in the press today, or in the last couple of days, Secretary Mnuchin is meeting with the senior ministers of China next week, I think next week, or maybe this week, and that's important. In addition to that is all the other geopolitical stuff. Americans should understand that China has the right to grow itself and be proud of itself and want to regain its rightful spot on the planet. That does not mean you have to have a natural conflict. And for those of you who don't go to China, they have serious issues too. So take America. We have all the food, war, and energy we need. Our neighbors are wonderful, Canada and Mexico. We have not had a war with Mexico since 1848. We're pretty lucky. There's no war in North America, South America. If you go to China, their neighbors are North Korea, South Korea, Philippines, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Russia. They don't have enough food, war, and energy. They have 500 million people living in poverty. They don't have a rule of law. They talk about their own corruption. They don't have our institutions. They don't have the depth and transparency of our financial markets writ large, venture capital, private equity. They don't have the university system we have. They don't have the innovative culture we have. They have a long way to go. So this notion that somehow it's automatic success, that's not right. What we should be doing is working with them together to make it a better planet for everybody. The other thing about China, by the way, they've never been expansionary. If you go back 2,000 years, China was never invading its neighbors. Now, that was not true of Italy, Greece, most of the European nations. Okay, that's not the way they are. So, I think it could be worked out, but it's going to take serious people working hard on it.
But how severe is the current slowdown in China?
It is a slowdown. So you've had economically, we kind of had Goldilocks in October. We're going to 3%. Things feel good. Inflation out of control. The Fed's raising rates gently. You had global growth in Japan and Europe and China. And now you have a slowdown. Now, I think it's probably a slowdown as opposed to, we're on our way to a deep recession. So even the IMF thinks we'll have global growth like 2.7 to 2.9 next year, down from 3.5. That was their prior projection. America, ex the shutdown, looks like it will be growing to 2 to 2.5%. Japan's growing a little bit, but there was a slowdown. And China is probably the most serious one. And the one with more ramifications for the rest of the world because, China growth of 5%, is $600 billion a year of GDP growth of the world. Now, the thing about China is they have the wherewithal. They owe the money in their country to themselves. They can macro-manage in a way you can't do in the United States. There are 7 people who control the nation. They're quite capable. They're quite competent. They simply say, you're going to lend to you. You're going to hire people. You're going to build that bridge. And it kind of works. It'll work for another 5 years or 10 years. They can macro-manage. And they have the wherewithal to recapitalize their banks if there's a problem in the financial system, which there probably is. And so they're trying to work that through to keep jobs, peace, prosperity. So my view is that they'll accomplish that the next couple of years. There will be a point, and I've said this to my board, I don't know if it's 3 years or 10 years out, where they will have more serious consequences when they have market reform. You can't tell people not to sell stock in most parts of the world. The Chinese do. And so they can do things we can't. So I think they'll have issues as they become a more fully developed nation. And I think they understand that too, by the way.
Are you as sanguine about Britain and Brexit?
I've always thought, look, you could argue two sides. Britain being free of a sclerotic Europe is not an unreasonable thing. It isn't possible to do in an undifficult way. And so the thing about Brexit was always the complications are extraordinary. The British people don't fully understand what it means. They're just finding out. Companies are just starting to tell people, well, if this happens, I have to do that. Let's move in a plant or closing something down. And so I think a hard Brexit will be a disaster for Great Britain. We don't think it's going to happen because it's bad for Europe, too. So they'll just extend things and have kind of agreements. But we're prepared for hard Brexit. I mean, we had no choice to them right from the start. That JPMorgan Chase can't be in a position where we get to March 19th or March 20th and we can't conduct business in Europe. It just isn't possible. So we've already spent hundreds of millions of dollars getting prepared for that. But we are prepared for that, but not everyone is. Customs ports aren't, certain exporters aren't, certain manufacturers aren't, certain real estate people aren't, and there are also the unknowns. There are things that will happen in a hard Brexit we don't understand today. And so you have to know that's going to happen. So it's unfortunate. I'm hoping that they have a withdrawal agreement, which all that is kind of an agreement in principle that gives them 2 to 4 years to negotiate a real deal. In that 2 to 4 year period, I shouldn't say negotiate. I've told us the Brits, it's not a negotiation, it's a surrender. Right. It's 100% up to what Europe wants. If they want to take this business, this thing, that swap facility, they can simply dictate it. And Britain has no choice. So I'm not saying they're going to do that, but it's a really complicated situation. And the Brits were dealt a bad hand, and they played it badly.
And complicated even more the European elections and the fact that the disruption in Europe could be.
We don't know who's going to be negotiating. The regulators are going to change. The politicians are going to change.
The head of the central bank is going to change.
The head of the central bank.
So by the end of the year, we'll have a whole new cast of characters.
Exactly.
How do you prepare for that?
I tell you, the most important thing is, like, if you're a client, we want to serve you through thick or thin. So we were doing stress testing way before stress tests, and most of those to look at what are the range of possibilities, even the worst ones, and the JPMorgan has to survive the worst one. Other than that, and the multiple secondary, tertiary effects of the worst one. So think of a disaster in China we can handle. Think of it, whatever it is by country we can handle. If Europe goes into a great recession, we can handle it. That's not my preference. Obviously, it'll affect our earnings and stuff like that, but we'll be fine. You know, the goal to me is to do better for the clients next thing we did this year. The earnings themselves will fluctuate a little bit based on some things I can control, some things I can't control, and so we try to run our business be very coherent. Countries don't, and clients don't like it when a bank is in and out. You can't go in and out. You can't be a fair weather friend. So we've been in these countries for 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, 125 years, 150 years. We've been banking some clients that long, and we are going to continue to do that through thick or thin. We did it right through the Great Recession, whether it was making markets for clients or rolling over trillions of dollars of debt at the same price. You know, I'd say banks never got credit for this, but in the middle market and large corporate, they raised credit at the same price. Not at the market price, which was 17% for some of these clients. You know, but at LIBOR plus 250. And so because, you know, we're their lender of last resort, and we try to play that role, knowing, you know, that's not about earnings at that time. It's about getting, you know, society, you know, getting the economy functioning and healthy.
You have said, though, that if you had to redo what you did during the financial crisis, that you'd be much more reticent, that your trust in government has really eroded. Not only your trust in government, generally trust in government, trust in institutions, whether it's the church, the schools. How do you reestablish trust?
You know, you learn over and over the same lessons. I always say the lessons relearned. You know, I don't know if any of you have ever been in a boxing ring. You learn over and over not to drop your hands. You know, and it takes a while before your instincts that thing's to keep your hands up. And so the governments, and this is true around the world, one government can agree to something and the next government can change it. And they change it based on political whims. You can protect yourself, but when any government comes after you and says, we don't care, well, it's very hard for a bank to do anything. You know, you don't have like a place to go. You really don't even have a court to go to in most places. It's simply the regulator, the politician, the litigator, and, you know, you got your back up against the wall, and they use that. I don't think they should. So, you know, the American government, when Bear Stearns and WAMU happened, I thought it was acted completely inappropriately. I will write about that in my book and probably name a few names.
So just one last point. Because
that part would be fun.
One last point, which is maybe less contentious, but maybe even more complex, is healthcare. Yeah. And you had established a partnership with Amazon and with Berkshire Hathaway in an attempt to reduce healthcare costs. But there's a lot of discussion about the price of pharmaceuticals and drugs and so on, but that's only about 8 to 10% of our healthcare costs. Yeah. What are your priorities, and how are you
I should have, when I listed the series of issues facing the United States, that's one of them. It's now 18.5% of GDP. Our average developed world is 9%. So as a competitive thing, now of course if you get better health, it's a good thing. And so I don't want to act like we have great health systems and hospitals and pharmaceuticals, and you're right, the pharmaceutical we talk about, but it's 10% of the problem. But here are the problems. End of life, it's like 15%, it should be half of that. Fraud and administrative costs, like 25 or 30%, they should be half of that. Drugs are underused and overused. As it turns out, we all put in high deductibles. You know, we thought we were getting people skin in the game. They go shopping more. They don't shop. I mean, I can ask you all get blood tests and MRIs or CAT scans, whatever. You have no idea what they cost, and you never asked. Doesn't matter if you have a deductible. And you can't go on your phone and get it. There's no transparency either. Even though now hospitals, you know, are supposed to be publishing those things, but they're almost impossible to read. And then, you know, wellness. I mean, 40%, I think 40% of our healthcare costs are related to obesity. And obesity drives cancer, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, depression. You know, and you think we'd be teaching education, nutrition, and some, you know, like just walk a little bit to kids in high school and grammar schools. And I was a kid, I remember President Kennedy put in that, I forgot what it was called, but we all were running 660s and all doing push-ups and pull-ups. And you know, we got to get back to like common sense stuff. And then get rid of the inefficiencies with data, transparency, analytics. And there are 40 million uninsured. So I think we should have we need to have universal coverage in the right way for Americans. So even the 40 million uninsured have access to your emergency rooms. So it's not that they can't get medicine, they just get the worst way. That visit is $10,000. A little bit of prevention is $1,000. And so there's so many things we can fix. And so this health thing is Amazon, Berkshire, JPMorgan. We got staying power. We've hired some great people. We're going to take the long-term view. We're going to figure out how to attack this problem using data and analytics and And we haven't decided how to do that yet. As you know, it's extremely complex. And anyone who wants to help. We're not trying to do this against it. Ours is a not-for-profit thing. We want better outcomes for our people. We think we can save a lot of lives fixing what I just talked about at our own company. Diabetes, we have. Now with the wellness programs we do, the actuaries tell me you're saving 50 to 75 lives a year because people find out that they have high blood pressure, and they could drop dead from, or walking diabetes, they could drop dead from. And so all these things, we just have to do a better job. And it's going to take a while to fix it, and it needs to be sustained. The thing about Obamacare is it didn't fix the fundamental problems. It just added people to them. And so we just kind of go back and say, how can we do a great job for the American citizen, fixing the problems, and it's not against anybody.
We could go on and on, but somebody's just pointed out that we've run out of time. So, Jamie, thank you so much for coming and for being so candid and sharing your
You're welcome. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me oh, it's off.